I'm Trish.
And I'm Brandy.
And you're listening to episode 23 of
Connected Conversations. This is your go-to space where international teachers, leaders, and parents like us get together for real talk, real tips, and sharing tools to thrive abroad in the international schools world.
Between us, Brandy and I have been doing this international teaching gig for nearly 40 years across 4 continents in 8 countries and soon to be more.
Yep.
And worked with tons of EAL curricula and taught in EAL classrooms across the globe.
Definitely. Today's episode is part of our part of our Insider Voices series, which is also international, where we share real stories from international educators, leaders, and parents living and working abroad around the world. Today, we are going to be fully in the EAL realm.
Our guest today is Patty McGee. She's a recognized literary consultant, speaker, and educator with a passion for transforming classrooms into spaces where language and learning come alive. She's a literacy consultant, I would just like to say.
Yes.
Literary as well.
Well, together. It goes together. With decades of experience as a teacher, a coach, and also being an advocate for delightful literacy practices. Yep. Patty has worked alongside educators across the country, partnering to unlock the full potential of their students through innovative and practical teaching strategies. She's also written 3 books, and her most recent book being Not Your Granny's Grammar.
I love that title.
Me too.
So even though her conversations may be based in the U.S., her conversation today extends across many messages we're hearing around the world and how language learning and acquisition exists out there in the international realm.
So are you ready?
Let's
get connected. So, hello, Patty. Welcome to Connected Conversations. It's so lovely to have you here.
I am so happy to be here.
Thanks for waking up early to be here with us. Yes. I know it's our afternoon, but early morning for you. So thank you.
It's always fun to have someone across the globe join us as well. So if we can jump right into it, for those people out there who don't know yet who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. So I started as a classroom teacher in the town that I grew up in. So my first grade teacher was my principal. So that means she taught me to read and taught me how to teach. It was just really quite the full circle. And then I was a school librarian, an in-school instructional coach. Very early on, like instructional coaches weren't that common at that time. And so it was interesting to figure it all out. And from there, it brought me to like a more regional staff developer position. And then I started kind of on my own. I call myself a traveling teacher. A second grader. Oh gosh, it was so cute. I was walking out of a school and I could overhear her talking to her grandpa. And she said, "Grandpa, that lady's not a stranger. She's a traveling teacher, which means she comes to schools to make teachers' jobs just a little bit easier. And sometimes she teaches us." And so I prefer that definition of my work.
For sure.
That's really sweet.
I'll take that.
I love that. That's really sweet.
Right? So in that path of literacy and working in the library to start out and teaching young learners, we've invited you here today because you're like an expert in the literacy realm, right? Can you talk a little bit about like what you've written and what kind of things you do there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wrote my first book. I think it came out in 2017. And it was about how we can respond to writers without having correction as our main vehicle. Because I just saw in the classroom how, first of all, when we were correcting, it was like very isolated. And if it was correction, but with the student, it was something that was just really hard for them to take. In my mind, I had this feeling that there was like only 2 ways of responding to student writing. And that was correction or just like fluffy feedback. Like, whoa, it's great.
Oh, looks great.
Keep on being great. Yeah. And there had to be an in-between. And so that was what my first book was on, my discovery of ways that we can give very abbreviated, effective, timely feedback without correction. And then
I think that's something a lot of teachers struggle with too. Like, the amount of things you assign grows over time. And then now what are you commenting on, and how can you build in the next lesson? So that's great. It's great.
Yes. It's made a huge difference in my teaching because I now teach students that I probably won't meet again because I'm in a district and we might change classrooms and I'm a stranger basically to the students. But when I sit down with them and kind of use the structure and approach that I wrote about, it just makes a huge difference in how kids take the feedback and use it.
Right. So that was your first book, but I think you've written more than one, right?
Yes. Over the pandemic, before the pandemic started, I was thinking of a different book. And then I could not get into classrooms, obviously. And I didn't even want to ask because that was just like in all of the things that were happening, that was just too much of an ask. So I basically took my entire Google Drive and put it into a book of really the essentials in teaching writing. So it's called The 7 Essentials. And it was just really about very simple practices that are research-based, that are things that we can adopt as teachers and see writers flourish. And that was my second book. And then my third book is the one that just came out in June, and it's called Not Your Granny's Grammar. And it's been a pleasure to write and a joy to speak about and go into classrooms again with kids and teach in this approach, which is entirely different than traditional approaches to grammar.
For those who haven't maybe read your books yet, which grades would you say this really is most applicable to, or where do you go in and do the training on working with this?
Yes. So I have a resource out that is meant for K1, but my latest grammar book is meant for 2 through 8, but definitely these practices are applicable for high school and beyond, because when I say give workshops on it or am showing teachers in schools how they might use these practices, the adults are learning from these lessons at the same time. And it's really nice because I found in my own anecdotal research that most teachers avoid teaching grammar for 2 reasons. One, they feel like they don't know it, which I totally get.
Yeah.
Because I've been learning a lot. And 2, they just really don't feel that the worksheet identification route and approach, let's say, is working. So it just feels like something unnecessary.
Well, we definitely feel that the work that you are doing in the States is so relevant abroad, because as an international educator, if you go to an international school, you're going to be teaching English most likely. And I will say,
and across the curriculum, every
too.
subject.
Yeah. And I will say, when I first came here, I took a TEFL course, and I realized really quickly that I learned about 10% of English grammar when I was in the States. And there's a whole world of it that you are exposed to when you have to teach English as a second language as well. So we're really, really happy to have you here today.
All 3 of your books have really relevant topics for the people in the international realm, like how we give feedback, constructive feedback, and timely, all of that. The writing process, and all of this. So we've got some questions that we'd like to ask you to extend that a little bit more. So, like, you've spent years working and the intersection of like literacy, language, and like student voice from what we're seeing. So when you hear how English operates like as the dominant access language in international schools. Like, what immediately resonates with your work? Like, how can they cross apply this into the international context?
Yes. I would say the first thing that resonates is some of the tools that I created in Not Your Granny's Grammar. I started creating grammar manipulatives because we know that writing is kind of the final frontier for English learners. And it's hard to get there without knowing English grammar. But yet at the same time, we're kind of teaching English grammar and then expecting kids to be able to know it immediately, apply it immediately and consistently after that.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much the only subject I found that we teach something and we expect immediate usage. And the grammar manipulatives that are in our book, I just think are a really nice scaffold for students who are learning English and are like learning English at any point, but then also right before they're really mastering the skill of writing and expressing the English language on the page, because these manipulatives are playful and they're also, for example, like one of my favorite ones to use is what I call sentences from a sentence. So we get a good, juicy, lengthy sentence or two. We type it up on a doc and enlarge the font. And then we cut out each word and cut out each piece of punctuation. And then students together write as many sentences as they can, reusing the words as much as they want to. But it's something where, because of that, they're not trying to figure out how to spell something. They're not trying to figure out, what sentence they could actually write from scratch. It's a really beautiful way of composing without having to think of all the other things. And they're usually doing it with a partner. So they're bouncing ideas off of each other. They're deciding, does this work? Is this really a sentence? And it gives opportunity, especially because we're writing multiple sentences, to practice that grammar that can then be applied to writing.
It's such a great idea because, like, when you think about students who are first learning to write in those stages while they're learning grammar, there's so many layers to the onion of the sentence they're trying to put together.
So true.
And now, like, maybe they do know the grammar, but they don't yet know how to form that letter really well. So that's another impediment. So having something like a manipulative like that and a total physical response thing, that's something we're big on.
Yes.
Using manipulatives in the classroom. So that sounds like a great resource for teachers.
Really lovely. And I feel like that's something that can translate to any international setting as well. Kids are kids no matter where you go. And I'm going to actually take that back. People are people no matter where you go, because it's also learn better with hands-on experiences. Sure. And, you find that writing and grammar, and I would maybe extend it to English as well. These are subjects that you don't see a lot of manipulatives or hands-on experiences with. So that's really great that you provide that. Yeah. So in international schools, it's exactly how you're saying. We expect in some ways that students are absorbing the language and they start to gain this conversational English, usually first and more naturally than the academic English that we are wanting them to also learn and use it in their writing specifically. So from your perspective, why is the gap between conversational language and academic language so often misunderstood by teachers and perhaps the systems that they're working within?
Yes, I think, first of all, conversational language is something that is heard so much more often than academic language. And because we are hearing it and we are watching the nonverbal communication that comes along with that, there's so much more opportunity for practice and for listening, and that kind of experience of just being immersed in conversational language all the time, it makes it more accessible. And then academic language, we're not hearing it as much. If we are reading it, that's still not enough necessarily to fully understand that kind of code switch into academic language. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. And so, like with the manipulatives that I was talking about before, we usually use those in conversation. So it's grammar out loud, and it gives us the opportunity to use the same type of vehicle that we are with conversational language as we're learning academic language, because it's out loud, it's in front of us, it's on our fingertips. And because it's just not as commonly a part of our conversation, that's one of the reasons why it takes longer to wrap our heads around.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
When we see that kind of experience where students can use the same, like I said, vehicle to learn academic language and then use it as they are conversational language, we'll see even more rapid growth.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I think one of the other things we noticed when looking through your website that we'll share, and other things that you've given us and talked about, like you talk a lot about clarity, purpose, and like explicit instruction in literacy. So how does the lack of explicit language instruction, do you think, disproportionately affect like multilingual learners that you've come across in your work there?
Yes. So I think one of the challenges for us as educators is we're not really specific about what we mean by explicit/direct instruction. A lot of times we think of it as us doing most of the talking, of us like in like semi or fully lecture mode, and then some silent activity that students engage in response to our lecture-y kind of approach. And that's something that kind of goes against the principles of learning, of the things that we need to have in place at any age with any subject to be able to learn. And so I think that a lot of the disconnect is really what is explicit teaching. And when we are thinking about what explicit teaching is, I think we need to look outside the school system. One of the most explicit teaching experiences I have is watching, say, a cooking video where they are explicitly showing, here's how much of these ingredients we are using. Here's how to put it together. Now replicate my steps for your own dish. And we're often not showing, like we're telling, and we're not giving enough in terms of like how to do this. It's more like, okay, remember to capitalize and punctuate, but it's not giving us a how-to.
Yeah.
And so I believe that part of that explicit direct instruction is really defining it to be clarity, to be able to show steps. It's often like what I've seen a lot of in terms of what we think is direct or explicit instruction is, okay, here's a piece of my writing. What could I do with this?
Right.
And that's more of an assessment. Like that's finding out, do kids know what we can do with this piece of writing? But it's not specifically like, oh, look, I would like to make sure that I am using academic language in this sentence. How do we do that? Here's step 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then those steps can be taken by the student and tried themselves again and again. And hopefully in conversation as well. Because those steps are just like little how-tos for whenever we get to that particular challenge. And that to me is what explicit teaching is.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. I think as teachers, we have our modeled writing on the board, and you've always got that percentage of kids who just copy what the teacher has written because they're seeking that explicit instruction of what are the steps that I need to follow. And I think writing is such a tough subject because you've got this side of it that's supposed to be open creativity, but then how do you turn that into a structure that can be repeated? So I love this question of what is explicit instruction. It's really something to reflect on.
And I found something just slightly different with my Chinese students context, where I was getting middle schoolers who had been following such a clear formula and copying the model off the board for years. But then when I was trying to get them into the creative writing realm or something, it went right back to them not knowing the basic rules of grammar or knowing those basic things to play with the language and have the building blocks the right way. That's why I can imagine that tool that you have, like with the sentences and just like trying to create as many as you can out of this would have been something that would be helpful rather than just this prescriptive box at the same time. So the instruction's really important there.
Yeah.
I think that when we overstructure in writing, we're not teaching kids how to write. We're teaching kids how to complete something.
Right.
It's like completion and compliance, not, okay, let me look at this particular scenario, situation, prompt, whatever it might be, and think, how can I make meaning on the page the most clear and the most accessible for my audience?
Right.
It's just instead like filling in the blanks. And I'm
audience
not against
purpose. So important, especially in the high school. Audience and purpose, text type. Yep.
Exactly. And I'm not against, say, sentence starters or sentence frames, things like that. Or I'm certainly not against structure. It just needs to hold some level of flexibility where we are thinking, like you just said, our audience and purpose. Now, where do the things I learn fit in for that audience and purpose? And choosing those intentionally rather than, okay, I'm supposed to write. And so now I'm going to follow in the States, I don't know if it's also international, but I'm going to follow the race structure, which is like receive the question, answer it, cite evidence and explain. And it's used so much that when you get to something like write a story, they don't know how, because it's always like just a short answer structure to them, or write an argument piece. And again, it's not a full piece. It's only like this one paragraph that we're so used to, and we're, almost like robotic in using. But
that's the
not
peel paragraph. Point, evidence, explanation, right? Link. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Great points.
So, we have many international teachers that say like, oh, they speak English fine, but, I find that they cannot access the curriculum. What do you think is being revealed in moments like that?
I think what's being revealed is, one, perhaps we're not looking at the phases of language acquisition and looking closely at what that means when they can speak conversationally, but not yet access the content. We really need to take into account what students can do and what they're ready to be trying. I also think the way that we expose students to the language of the content needs to be very intentional.
Yes.
That we are not just like giving a definition, let's say, for a particular word, but we are using that word in conversation or other words that go with it, cluster those words so that they're word families around particular concepts. Even within a concept, there's word families within that, and lots of practice using the academic language aloud. And I often say with a partner or a trio, because it gives everyone the chance to practice, not just one student at a time. And so I think really it's twofold. It's one, how are we accessing the vocabulary? And is it something that is really based on how the brain learns vocabulary, like in those clusters or families? And also, how aware are we as educators of where students are in acquiring English? And when we know that, we're more intentional about what we're teaching in our content, and then how much of our content language we're teaching and how we're asking kids to learn it.
Mm-hmm. Great answer.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, so many comments came up in my head with it, like to just engage in. I mean, someone once taught me or told me, I don't know who to credit with this, but they said that our brain is arranged like filing cabinets. And every time you present a kid with a new word, they're sitting there trying to figure out, okay, am I pulling out the animals file? Am I pulling out the colors file? Like, where does that go? And then how deep in it? Which page in the file does it go on? Is it in size, shape, color? Like the way that our brains access this material, but is so diverse, but you also don't need to teach every single word that you're talking about, because we all know from immersion classes, bilingual classes, that as long as you're doing like at their level +1, you know, so you're giving them that 10% stretch or something, a lot of context clues fill in the other words, but you do have to explicitly pre-teach certain vocabulary to make sure that they're able to access the keywords of this vocabulary.
And I like what you said about like authentically using it also in conversation. So you're bridging this like academic language and somewhat conversational language as well, because then it's what's the word I'm looking for? Not verified. It's what's the V word? Valuable.
There you go.
All right.
Yes.
Because then it becomes a valuable and authentic experience for them to use it in a real conversational context too.
Yes. And, you know, the space between hearing the new vocabulary, conversational vocabulary, and mastery of that usage is stretched language. And are we making space for stretched language? Are we making space for the language we know and are trying and approximating and are not yet there? That space is important. That space is necessary. And so allowing and supporting and encouraging stretched language, I think sometimes is also missing in content areas.
Yeah. I think that plays into this next idea of like international students are often describing like feeling smart in their home language or their mother tongue, but like less capable at school, you know? And what do you think educators can do to help understand and maybe bridge that emotional weight of that experience to support students?
I think relentlessly and endlessly reminding students of their strengths and not in a fluffy, I love the way you blah, 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 because they'll focus on, and this is in research, students will focus on like how we feel about what they're doing. But if we say something like, you used that word or you framed that sentence in this way, and this is important because it makes sense to many others. Or I hear you using some of your home language and interspersing some of this new language. And that's important because that's how we create meaning in our minds. And then we'll be able to create meaning in other ways. So it's just constantly pointing out, here's what you're doing, here's what's strong, and reminding them of really not their deficits, but their strengths. Because when we know what our strengths are, we can use that as a foothold for other things to come. And when we feel like we have a foundation and we're moving in the right direction, and someone sees that, tells us why it's important,
Yep.
the feeling of discomfort around, not feeling as capable or as quote unquote smart, really can start to diminish. It may not ever go away, because I think there's almost like within a school or within a community messaging that is saying that to people. I have a friend who is still learning English, is a native Spanish speaker, and has been told in her community that she just really doesn't sound smart. And meanwhile, she's just brilliant. Like, she's just brilliant. And so I think it's also, some of it is out of our hands as educators, but we can counteract it by saying, no, this is what you're doing. This is why it's important. This is where you came from, in terms of first acquiring language. And I don't even want to say language. It's just like, there's no superior language. It's just when we say English is the most commonly used one.
Yeah.
And this is hard. And the older you get, the harder it gets to learn a new language.
Oh, we know.
Yes.
Duolingo is not impressed with me this week. No.
Oh, that's funny. But just really pointing out relentlessly and endlessly what strengths kids are accessing, what foundations they've already established. And I think that can add a little bit of counteractive energy around the belief system of, you don't know English, you're not smart. It's not true.
Yep, absolutely.
It's an instructional strategy, isn't it? Because you can weave that into any kind of lesson or activity you're doing, pointing out these very explicit strengths that you're noticing your students do. So if we can jump over into assessment world, in international schools, assessments are usually very language heavy. Yeah. How can teachers better separate a student's language proficiency from content understanding without lowering those expectations?
Yes. Well, I think that we can have the belief that every student can. And it's a matter of looking at the progression of time of, like I was saying, language acquisition. But I also think that we can put in some supportive structures or supportive types of experiences that are also getting us ready for these very, complex, sophisticated types of assessments. And one of my favorite practices is shared reading, where we take a piece of text, which can be specifically the type of thing that students will see in these assessments, and we enlarge it or project it. And we use that multiple times for multiple entry points, like how to read it, how to make sense of it, how to consider how to answer it, making a plan, like all of these things that we can do in little 10-minute pockets. And that repetition of revisiting the types of things that students will see on these assessments will teach the fluency, basically, of how to approach these. And if we start early, and we do this often in small pockets for different entry points with different types of test-like scenarios, kids will also acquire, that's like another language itself, It's like test-taking language is its own type of content. And so when we're exposing it to students together and we're all looking at it, students are talking about it, we're giving explicit instruction using steps on how to make sense or how to do any of the things that we're looking for kids to be able to do on these assessments, we're also teaching that at the same time. And there's greater readiness and confidence in going into those assessments.
Mm-hmm. So do you, in that vein then, do you feel that you have a recommendation or a belief of like what meaningful assessment looks like as students are still developing their academic English, but they still have to meet those standards? Do you have some ideas for that?
Yes, I know that most of the time we as educators, when we say assessments, we're thinking grades. But I think, and it's not just my thinking, it's also absolutely research-based, is we really need to think about assessment for learning and not just assessment of learning.
Of course.
And that assessment for learning happens constantly. And we're looking at what can students do, almost do, and not yet do. And then where's my entry point of being able to support that growth? And then assessment of learning is something that we can practice often. And I think we can use also as formative assessment. So if we're going to give an assessment of learning, almost like a grade, we as educators look at that and say, what can students do, almost do, and not yet do? And where's my entry point here to be able to lift just a little bit how kids are looking at, approaching, and answering the sorts of things that work on a more formal assessments. So it's Black and William in their research around formative assessment, assessment for learning, found that we can double the rate of student learning when we're looking at students in this formative way and really being timely about the feedback that we offer. And that, I think, is underutilized in most places.
Yeah, definitely. We see that too. Yeah. Out here abroad too. So you have this teacher who's using summative and formative assessments and really gathering this data for how to help their students. And I believe that I will say most teachers out here really, truly want to support their students, but sometimes they're met with this message from school admin that they, just scaffold for the EAL learners in your classroom and they don't get a lot of support. Or they don't get training or they don't hear any kind of shared language through the school. They're kind of left in their own little island. What risks do you see in that type of approach?
Well, number one, it's not cohesive. It's like every person for themselves to try and figure it out. And what I might be doing, in my subject area is not consistent with what you're doing in your subject area. And when we're able to be consistent in practice, be consistent in understanding language acquisition, talk about it with each other in a way where we have backgrounds in language learning, it creates a more cohesive experience for the students. And that's concerning when it's not.
Yeah. Especially when that student's going to obviously go to another classroom next year. I mean, if there isn't that cohesion, then really the person who suffers is the student because their growth can be stopped or pulled back or slowed down. So yeah, I see that.
So from your experience, what happens when schools treat language support as a department, like there's an EAL department or something, rather than sharing the responsibility across all subjects, across the content? Any ideas on that?
Yes. WIDA is who I follow mostly in the States. Okay. And it's very clear in their recommendations that students learning a new language have both designated time to learn English and integrated time. So that ideally, I know that no school has these conditions ideally, but we would have designated ELD time or designated English learning time, and then integrated into the subject area, having support in a content area with a professional, along with the teacher collaborating in a way that will be supportive of their English learning in that content or in the classroom. So it's my deep belief, and it's not based on just experience, it's based on the research that's out there, is that both are necessary. It's not either or, and it's not separated. It is connected and integrated. Time to learn English, time to learn how to use and what to say and what English is important in a subject area.
I think that's a very powerful message. Like in my experience abroad, I've really seen both sides of that conversation, and both sides say that this is the only way, like the push in or the pull out, and it really depends on which school you go to. But I think that what you're saying is the truth, that like neither way is right or wrong, but a blend of both is what's going to support the learner the best or the fastest even. Yeah. So if we can maybe talk about how parents fit into this equation, because we've talked about the school systems, the teachers. Many times we hear parents often equating English proficiency with intelligence or their child's future success. How can schools or educators reframe that conversation with families where they're still maintaining honesty and empowerment, and they're also being culturally responsive?
Yes, I think that the way that we will be relentlessly and endlessly pointing out strengths to students in every area, but in English acquisition as well, is the way that we also want to talk to parents. So with parents, we can say, here is the progress that has been made. Here are the strengths in your child, in these areas and including English, and here are next steps. There's no shameful language in the way that we're responding. And we're almost framing the way that parents can think about this, because most of the time, if parents have a focus on something, and obviously there's a reason that they're going to international schools, and they're seeing through a lens of deficit, we can really help them reframe that deficit through the way we express what strengths are in place and what next steps are happening, and basically how to support those next steps. And that type of asset, language, approach, conversation, communication can really change the way that parents are looking at their own children, and also thinking, what are supports that I can add at home in order for more rapid growth?
Yep.
I love that positive reframe. I think many times parents just want their kids to learn English faster. They have this like preconceived idea of like, oh, 1 year in an international school, they'll be fluent. And then they realize like, wait, this is taking time. But I love this approach of focus on the positives, focus on the growth, what's already happened. And parents don't really know how to do that all the time. So
it's kind of funny because I mean, as we're recording this episode, we're obviously at the end of term 1 for many schools around the world. It is the height of report writing season. And just like even going to the level of comments with teachers, I've been having multiple conversations about reports. And I know you're the report checker at your school. So it's just, it's one of those things that it's, how do we get that? What went well, even better if, 2 stars and a wish, whatever it is that we do, but that reframing of like, here's strengths, here are next steps, and even how that comes across in report card. That's a key framing place and opportunity that we have. And we know that now then parent conferences are going to follow not far after this. So like there's so many opportunities we have to reframe that conversation. So I'm glad you pointed that out. Thank you. Yeah. So if you could shift one belief that educators hold about multilingual learners in your experience, like what would it be and why?
I don't know if this is a belief or rather knowledge. I think it would be really knowing the progression of language acquisition and believing that that will happen for every student. It just goes at different paces.
Right.
And that it's pretty basic too. Like this, it's very complex to learn a language, but the phases of language acquisition are very clearly laid out. And of course, kids can have, a foot in one phase and another foot in another. But just being aware of kind of where they are and where they're going, and believing that kids will, with the right supports, I think is the number one mind shift that we can take.
Like that.
For listeners out there who probably come from a variety of backgrounds, can you give us just a general understanding of the layers or steps of language acquisition?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go straight to the resource that I always look back at because I'm afraid to misquote or miss something. Like this is something where I print this, and I'll send you the resource so that teachers can access it in your show notes as well. But keeping this like in front of me because I'm sure eventually I can have this memorized, but there's just lots of reminders that I want to keep in mind. So I'm just going to go to WIDA can do descriptors. And it's just a very comprehensive tool that outlines kind of the phases of language acquisition and then what students can do in those phases.
That would be very helpful. We'll definitely link that in our show notes so people can have it at their fingers too.
And as you're finding this and as this is coming up on your screen, it's one of those things that I hope if there's a science teacher, a math teacher, any of those PE out there, this is also happening in your subject,
Yes.
It's like, so don't just write this off for the ELL teacher out there to sort. Like they're learning the tools and acquiring your skill in your subject too.
Yep.
Right. Exactly. So the can do descriptors begin with basically entering. So that might be a time where the student is just hearing the language for the first time, hasn't had much exposure. It used to be called the silent phase, but really the silent phase was coined because that student or that person who's in the entering phase might not say a lot, but there is a huge amount of observation, immersion, and just really acclimation to the language. And then we move on to emerging. So there's a attempt at using English or whatever language you're learning. And really that's when we are thinking about functional language, like to get what you need, and really teaching that vocabulary. As we move on, it's developing. So we're seeing a stronger usage and a more automaticity in conversational language. We move on to expanding, and that is when we're seeing usually a blend of conversational language, native language, and then really new academic language that we're blending together. Bridging is when it seems, like you were saying earlier, it seems like students understand English very well, but in their writing, it seems like, wait, hold on a second. I feel like you knew this and you could talk to me about it, but it's not really showing up on the page necessarily, or it's showing up on the page kind of in a smaller proportion than we thought. And then reaching it's not the final stage because it's the, say, last academic stage that sets kids up for lifelong language development. But reaching is where we see all pieces come together, and there's a proficiency in communication, both written and in conversation, and also in academic conversation, where students won't need as much support any longer.
Thank you.
I'm at the bridging and check. As you were going through this, I'm like, okay, no, I got that. But no, it's kind of like people go, your check is so good. And then when they actually have to write me an email or something, they realize, oh, I thought you knew this.
Yeah.
So I think that's me.
It is.
That's
I'm
true.
excited.
You've been so far. Come so far, and you have a little bit more to go.
Yeah.
This is a really powerful note for us to leave off on.
Yeah.
As we've spoken about these different facets of English, and for international listeners and educators, I think this is probably one of our biggest messages that you're sharing with us today, is this acquisition and how it's built into it's built into everything. It's built into your daily life, but all parts of being at school as well. So
what's your website? Where can people find you, and how can they follow up if they want to get in touch for anything?
Thank you. My website is pattymcgee.org. Patty is spelled with a Y, Patty. If you look up Patty McGee with an I, you're going to get a famous American skateboarder from the 60s.
Oh,
That's not me. She's very interesting and very accomplished. And I definitely think getting to know her and her successes is great. But if you want to find me, it's Patty with a Y. And there's a contact button right on any page. If you want to reach out. Like I said, I'm a traveling teacher, so I work and support schools everywhere. And lots of other resources are on the website as well. I have some really cool ideas on how to use grammar as a structure for learning content. So content area teachers, there's a free download that's called Mastering Any Content Through Grammar. It's a lot of manipulatives, as I was talking about.
Nice.
But they're content, not specific, but we can use our content in these tools. And so it's kind of a win-win because we're learning both grammar and content in those.
Amazing.
And if they want to order your book, do they do that on your website, or do they go to Amazon, or where can they find it?
Yes, Amazon, definitely. My website is soon going to be up with the option of ordering on my website. And internationally, my publisher is Corwin, but really the parent company of Corwin is Sage, and everywhere all over the world there's a Sage representative. So if you're not seeing it, there's a number of people who contacted me from China looking to purchase the book, and the best place to go was the Sage representative.
Okay. Excellent. Well, it was great meeting you today, and we look forward to maybe future connected conversations. Thanks for reaching out to us too.
Thanks, Patty.
Okay.
Thank you. We hope to hear from you soon. We'd like to thank Patty once again for joining us and sharing her amazing experience and wisdom around literacy learning across classrooms.
We really hope Patty's insights inspire you to consider language learning in a new way and hopefully get excited to try some new strategies.
And if you're looking to have something even more concrete to support your language learners, we definitely encourage you to take a look at the 3 books that Patty has written and published.
That's right. They've got fun names too. Not Your Granny's Grammar, Writer's Workshop Made Simple, and Then Feedback That Moves Writers Forward are all available on her website.
You'll also find a fourth book over there too called Grammar Study Micro Workshop. And don't worry, we'll link all of this below for you.
After you've taken a look at Patty's resources, you can head over to our website at connectedglobal.org and check out the goodies we have for you too.
Right. Including, but not limited to, teaching abroad guides, contract checklists, country resources, and system audits, and more.
Yep, there's so much there. And remember, once you're at connectedglobal.org, you can always book a consultation with us, whether you're a teacher looking for some great strategies to meet the needs of your learners, or you're a leader considering how to support educators teaching in those learners' spaces. We're here for you.
And if you've enjoyed today's conversation, help support the work we do by sharing it with a friend. Drop a friendly comment and subscribe so you don't miss more insider voices like Patty's.
Yep. So until next time, may your language learners be engaged.
Your language activities be exciting.
And your school's understanding of language acquisition be supportive and international. Not your granny's Say your last thing. Okay. Published. That's what you get, eating bites between we almost broke our cups. Hi ho! Hi ho!
We pulled it off, whatever.
I know we won't be able to do the outside, but yeah.